At midnight, my son burst in yelling, "You're no longer part of this family." Then he took my keys. Midnight in my house is usually quiet. Too quiet if I'm honest. The kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I had just dozed off in my armchair when the peace shattered. Ring, ring, ring. The sound was so loud I nearly jumped out of my seat. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again. Someone was pounding on my front door like the house was on fire. I stumbled to the window, heart pounding, and pulled the curtain back. My porch light was on, and that's when I saw him. My son. He was standing on the porch, breathing hard, fists clenched, face twisted with something I didn't recognize. Not sadness, not fear, pure anger. For one brief second, I felt relief just seeing him there. We hadn't spoken properly in weeks, and I had been worried. But when I opened the door, everything I thought I knew about that boy vanished. He didn't even wait for me to say a word. He just yelled, "You're no longer part of this family." The words were like a punch to the chest. I froze where I stood, gripping the edge of the doorframe just to stay upright. What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. But he didn't answer. His eyes darted past me, landing on the table in the hallway where I had left my car keys. Before I could react, he stepped inside, grabbed them, and turned for the door. "Wait!" I reached out, catching his sleeve for just a second. He yanked his arm free like my touch burned him. "Don't touch me!" he shouted, his voice breaking. And then he was gone, storming out into the night, slamming the door behind him so hard the frame rattled. Through the window, I watched him get into my car. The headlights flared, cutting across my yard, and then the sound of the engine roared as he sped off into the dark. I just stood there in my hallway, staring at the empty driveway. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I slowly sank to the floor, my back against the wall, listening to the silence that followed. My son, my only son, had just stormed into my home, screamed that I wasn't part of his family, and stolen my car. And I had no idea why. That was the night everything I thought I knew about my family, about my son, began to unravel. The house felt emptier than usual that night. I sat on the couch for hours after he drove away, replaying every word, every look. It didn't feel real. How did we get here? How did I become the enemy in my own son's life? Maybe to understand that night I have to go back a little. Back to when things were still normal. It started after my husband passed. 4 years, this house had been full of noise, of laughter, of Sunday dinners with the neighbors. When my husband was alive, my son and I were close. We were a team. He used to come by every other day after work, grab a sandwich, sit on the porch with me, and talk about everything: work, football, his plans for the future. But everything changed after he got married. At first I was happy for him. I wanted him to have a family of his own, someone to love him the way his father and I always had. But little by little I started to notice the distance. The visits stopped being casual. They became scheduled, short, almost rushed. He'd check his phone constantly, and if his wife texted, he would leave early. The last time we had dinner together as a family, she barely looked up from her phone. When she did speak, it was to complain about how far my house was from town, how small the guest room felt, how much work the house must be for me at my age. I tried to brush it off as harmless comments, but I could see my son listening, nodding along as if she was planting seeds. Then the paperwork started. One afternoon my son came over with a manila folder. He said it was just some things to make life easier. Power of attorney, he explained. Just in case anything ever happens to you, Mom. We'll take care of the house, your car, your bills. Something in my gut told me not to sign. Not because I didn't trust my son, I did, but because of the way his wife was standing behind him, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. I told them I wanted some time to think about it. My son looked disappointed, but he didn't push. She, on the other hand, let out a sigh loud enough to make her point clear. Over the next few weeks, the pressure got worse. I started getting phone calls from my son. First, they were gentle reminders. Then they turned into arguments. "Mom, you're being stubborn," he'd say. "This house is too big for you. What if something happens while you're alone?" I told him I was fine, that I loved my home, that I wasn't ready to give it up. Each time he sounded more frustrated. The last time we spoke before that night, he came over in person. The manila folder was back on my kitchen table, this time with more papers inside. "Just sign them, Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Why are you making this so hard?" I could feel my heart pounding as I pushed the folder back toward him. "I'm not ready," I told him. "This house is all I have left of your father. It's where you grew up. I'm not just handing it over like it means nothing." He slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about the way he said it, like it was a promise, sat heavy on my chest. The next morning I saw a Facebook post from his wife. It was just a single sentence. "Some people don't know when to let go." I knew it was about me. Everyone in town probably knew. By the time midnight came and I heard that banging on the door, I wasn't just scared. I was bracing for something bad. But I never imagined it would end with my own son taking my car and screaming that I wasn't part of the family anymore. That was when I realized this wasn't just about paperwork. It wasn't just about helping me. Something deeper was going on. Something I hadn't seen until it was too late. And I was about to find out just how far they were willing to go. The morning after that midnight knock, I barely slept. My son's words kept looping in my head like a broken record. "You're no longer part of this family." It didn't sound like something he came up with on the spot. It sounded rehearsed, like something he'd been holding in, waiting for the right moment to throw at me. And that was the first clue that this was bigger than just a late-night argument. When I walked into the kitchen that morning, I noticed something strange. The manila folder was gone. The last time I'd seen it, it was on my table after our argument. I hadn't touched it. But now it was gone, as if someone had come into my house and taken it. I checked the front door. The lock looked scratched, like someone had tried to force it. My stomach twisted. Who would break into my house just to take those papers? Unless they weren't planning to ask me to sign anymore. Later that day, I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, while watering the plants in the yard. She hesitated before speaking, then finally said, "Your son was here yesterday afternoon, wasn't he?" "Yes," I said carefully. She frowned. "I saw him out by the mailbox talking to a man I didn't recognize. They were looking at your house, pointing at the roof, the garage, even the backyard. It looked like they were negotiating something." My heart skipped. Negotiating what? The house wasn't for sale. I thanked her, but inside my mind was racing. That evening I drove into town to pick up groceries. In my spare car, the old one my husband used to drive. When I parked outside the store, I spotted my son's wife across the street. She was on the phone, pacing, her voice just loud enough for me to catch a few words. "Yes, we have the keys now," she said. Her tone was sharp, impatient. "No, she still hasn't signed anything, but it doesn't matter. We'll have it done by next week." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. What didn't matter? What was happening next week? I stayed hidden in my car until she left, my chest tight, my mind spinning. When I got home that night, I sat in my living room and tried to piece everything together. The folder, the arguments, the Facebook post, Mrs. Fletcher's warning, the phone call I had just overheard. One by one, the pieces started to form a picture I didn't want to see. They weren't just trying to pressure me. They were planning to take everything, with or without my permission. 2 days later I got an envelope in the mail. It wasn't from my son. It was from a real estate office in town. Inside was a letter congratulating me on beginning the process of transferring property ownership. The letter said someone had submitted paperwork to put the deed to my house in my son's name. But I hadn't signed anything. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the letter. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was theft. And they weren't going to stop until they had everything. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the letter. I thought about calling my son, but what would I even say? Would he admit it? Would he even care? I thought about my husband, about the years we spent saving for this house, building a life here, raising our son inside these walls. And then I thought about the look on my son's face that night. Not sadness, not guilt, but anger. Like I was standing in the way of something he believed he deserved. That was when I made a decision. If they were going to try to take my life apart piece by piece, then I was going to fight. The letter from the real estate office sat on my kitchen table all night. I must have read it a dozen times, my hands trembling every time I saw the words, transfer of ownership. By morning I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep waiting for them to explain themselves. They weren't going to. If I didn't act now, I could lose everything. That afternoon I called my son and told him to come over. My voice was calm, but inside my stomach was in knots. When he arrived, he barely looked at me as he stepped into the kitchen. "Mom, I'm busy," he said. "What's this about?" I slid the letter across the table toward him. He didn't pick it up. He didn't even flinch. "Do you know what this is?" I asked quietly. He finally glanced down. And then, to my shock, he smiled. "Good," he said. "It's about time." I felt my throat tighten. "You filed this, didn't you?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than words. "I didn't sign anything," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just take this house. It's not yours." That's when he slammed his hand on the table, hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. "This house is mine," he shouted. "You think you can just sit here forever, clinging to Dad's memory, while the rest of us struggle? This place is worth money, Mom. Real money. We could sell it and actually build a future." I stared at him, tears burning in my eyes. "A future for who?" "Yes. You. Your wife. Where does that leave me?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. "You can move in with us," he said flatly. "We've talked about it. It's the only way this makes sense." My hands shook as I pushed the letter back toward him. "No," I said firmly. "This house is all I have left. Your father and I built this life brick by brick, and I am not giving it away like it means nothing." That's when the mask slipped. His face hardened, and I could see the anger boiling just under the surface. "You're being selfish," he said. "You're making this harder than it has to be. If you just sign the papers, we could be done with this." "And if I don't?" "Yes." He leaned in, his voice low. "Then we'll do it without you." For a moment I just stared at him. The boy I raised, the boy who used to sit on this same kitchen floor eating peanut butter sandwiches, was standing in my kitchen threatening to take my home. I felt something inside me snap. "Get out," I said. My voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes just before a storm. "I don't know who you are anymore, but you are not the son I raised. Get out of my house." For a moment he just stood there, his jaw tight, his hands balled into fists at his sides. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. I stood there in the kitchen, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Some part of me wanted to run after him, to call him back, to beg him to change his mind. But another part of me, the part that had been pushed around, cornered, made to feel small, was done begging. That night, I sat in the dark with every light off, just listening to the house creak. I felt like a soldier waiting for the next attack. And deep down I knew it was coming. I just didn't know it would come at midnight. The house felt too quiet after he left. Even the tick of the kitchen clock sounded loud, like it was keeping time with my racing heart. I sat there for hours, staring at the front door, half expecting him to come back and apologize. But the longer I waited, the clearer it became. He wasn't coming back, not to say sorry, not to take back what he'd said. And for the first time I was afraid of my own son. When the sun went down, the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and turned off every light in the house. I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, angry, determined, telling me he'd take the house whether I agreed or not. My mind kept replaying it over and over, until the words started to sound like a threat. Around midnight I heard it, the faint sound of gravel crunching outside. My heart stopped. I grabbed the old baseball bat your father used to keep behind the door and crept to the window, moving as quietly as I could. There he was, standing in the driveway, staring at the house. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just stood there like he was waiting for me to come out. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed perfectly still, hidden behind the curtain. After a minute, he turned and walked toward the garage. I froze, watching, unable to move. Then I heard it, the metallic squeal of the garage door. The sound of my car engine turning over. And then, just like that, he was gone. I didn't chase him. Didn't even call out his name. I just stood there, numb, as the taillights disappeared down the street. When I finally sat down, the tears came, hard and fast like a dam breaking. This wasn't just about the car. It was about everything. The house, papers, the shouting match in the kitchen. For years I had told myself we were still a family. Maybe not perfect, maybe strained at times, but a family. But that night, watching him drive away, I realized something had broken between us. And I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. Barely slept. Every noise outside had me on edge. Every passing set of headlights made me think he'd come back, this time to take something else. When morning finally came, I felt hollow. The house seemed different, emptier somehow, as if it knew something terrible had just happened. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the letter again. But this time my fear had hardened into something else. Resolve. By noon, I was at the county clerk's office, asking to see the property records for my house. The woman behind the counter frowned at her computer screen, clicking through records, then glanced up at me. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly. "It looks like a transfer request was filed 2 weeks ago. You're listed as the current owner, but..." She hesitated. "But what?" "Pressed. But the paperwork includes a notarized signature, yours." I felt like the room tilted sideways. "My signature?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "Do you want me to print you a copy?" My hands shook as I nodded. When she handed me the document, my stomach dropped. It was my name, my handwriting, but I hadn't signed it. Someone had forged my signature. I walked out of the office clutching the paper like it might vanish if I let go. I had been violated, not just as a homeowner but as a person. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. And for the first time I realized something terrifying. If my own son was willing to forge my name, what else was he willing to do? The forged signature burned in my hands the whole drive home. I must have read it 20 times before I even reached my driveway. No matter how many times I looked, it didn't change. My name was there, my handwriting, my initials on every page. But it wasn't me. And if it wasn't me, that meant someone I trusted had done this. And there were very few people who had access to that kind of paperwork. I didn't call my son. I didn't even text him. Something told me that if he had gone this far, there was nothing I could say that would make him confess. Instead, I called the only person I could think of, my old friend Martha. She worked part-time for a law firm downtown, mostly handling estate paperwork. "Martha," I said the moment she picked up. "Someone forged my name on a property transfer form. I need help." She didn't hesitate. "Bring it in right now," she said. "I'll have one of our attorneys look at it." By that afternoon, I was sitting in a quiet conference room across from a sharp-eyed lawyer named Daniel Pierce. He wore a navy suit and glasses, and there was something about the way he flipped through the pages that made me feel both nervous and oddly safe. "This isn't just sloppy forgery," he said finally, laying the papers flat on the table. "This is professional. Whoever did this either had access to your original signature samples or spent a lot of time practicing." Felt sick. "So what happens now?" He tapped the paper thoughtfully. "We can contest this. In fact, we should contest this. But before we go to court, we need to know exactly who submitted this and how they got it notarized. Do you have any idea who might be behind it?" I hesitated. My heart didn't want to say it. But my gut already knew. My son, I said quietly. He's been trying to get me to sign the house over to him for months. I refused. The night before last, he came to my house, screaming. He took my car. I think he filed this behind my back. Daniel didn't even flinch. Then that's where we start, he said calmly. We'll pull the notary record and subpoena any security footage from the county office. If he forged your name, there will be evidence. You just need to be ready for what we find. The next few days felt like living inside a crime drama. Martha called with updates. Daniel emailed me copies of documents as they came in. And each time the picture became clearer and darker. The notary record showed a male witness present when the papers were signed. The timestamp matched a day I remembered. I had been at the doctor's office that morning. I couldn't have been at the clerk's office even if I'd wanted to. Then came the footage. Grainy security camera stills, printed and stapled together. But the man in them was unmistakable. My son. He was standing at the counter, my paperwork in his hand, smiling at the clerk, like he was doing nothing wrong. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the photos until my coffee went cold. He had lied. He had stolen. And now he had tried to erase me from my own home, the home where I had raised him. My grief turned to something else, something sharper. Resolve. I called Daniel first thing the next morning. File whatever you have to file, I told him. If my son wants a legal fight, he's going to get one. But even as the legal wheels began to turn, my stomach stayed in knots. Because this wasn't just going to be about paperwork anymore. Sooner or later, my son would find out I was fighting back. And if he had already stolen my signature and my car, what would he try to take next? The first hearing was set for the following week. I thought I'd feel relief knowing we were finally doing something, but instead, I felt like I was walking around with a storm cloud over my head. Had no appetite, barely slept, and every time the phone rang my heart leapt, terrified it might be my son. But the next call wasn't from him. It was from Martha. Can you come down to the office? She asked gently. There's something you need to see. When I arrived, she and Daniel were waiting for me in the same small conference room. There were more papers on the table this time. Bank statements, loan documents, and more security footage. Daniel looked serious. We've been digging into your son's finances, he said. What we found explains a lot. He slid a stack of papers toward me. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Then my stomach dropped. My son was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans in default. Even a payday loan from one of those predatory lenders downtown. And worst of all, there was a mortgage application, denied, listing my house as potential collateral. I felt the blood drain from my face. He tried to use my house to get a loan. Daniel nodded grimly. Yes. It was denied because you weren't listed as a co-signer. That's why he forged your signature. This wasn't just about taking the house. He needed it to cover his debts. And if he'd succeeded, you would have been on the hook. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling. How much debt are we talking about? He hesitated before answering. About $240,000. I covered my mouth with both hands. That was more than I'd ever had in savings. More than I could ever pay off. If he had gotten that loan, it could have destroyed me. Then Daniel pushed another file toward me. This part is harder, he said softly. Inside were text message records, subpoenaed from the notary's phone. I skimmed through them until one thread made my stomach twist. It wasn't just my son. His wife was involved too. Her messages were the worst. She won't sign willingly, just do it. Once we have the house, we can sell it and pay off everything. She'll be fine, she's old, she doesn't need it. She's old. The words hit harder than I expected. As if my entire life, my memories, my years of hard work could just be erased with a pen stroke because I was old. I put the papers down and pressed my hands to my face, fighting back tears. I don't understand, I whispered. I raised him better than this. I taught him to work hard to earn what he wanted. How could he do this to me? Martha touched my hand gently. People do desperate things when they're scared, she said quietly. But that doesn't make it right. You have to protect yourself and your home. That night, I walked through every room of my house. The living room where we used to open Christmas presents. The kitchen where I taught him to cook his first breakfast. The hallway with the height marks penciled into the doorframe, tracking his growth from toddler to teenager. All of it, every memory, was under threat because of what he'd done. But instead of breaking me, that thought lit something inside me. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of property anymore. I was fighting for my life, my past, my future, my dignity. When the court date finally arrived, I stood outside the courthouse in my best suit, my hands trembling around the folder of evidence Daniel had prepared. I wasn't ready to face my son, not really, but I knew I had to. This wasn't just about punishing him. This was about drawing a line. About saying, "You cannot erase me. You cannot take what I built." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked inside. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. I had been here once before years ago, jury duty, but this time was different. This time I wasn't a spectator. This time I was fighting for everything I had. Daniel walked beside me, calm and steady, carrying a thick binder of evidence. "You're going to be fine," he murmured. "Just tell the truth. That's all you have to do." I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we entered the courtroom, my heart stopped. There he was, my son, sitting at the defendant's table. He looked tired, angry, and somehow smaller than I remembered. Beside him sat his wife, her arms crossed, her chin held high like she owned the place. She wouldn't even look at me. For a moment I almost turned around and walked out. Almost. But then I remembered the letter. The forged signature. The grainy photo of him smiling at the clerk. And I kept walking. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp glasses, called the court to order. "This is a civil matter regarding a disputed property transfer," she said, her voice brisk. "We'll hear from the petitioner first. Ms. Reynolds, you may take the stand." I swallowed hard as I walked to the witness chair. The oath felt heavy on my tongue, like every word mattered more than anything I had ever said before. Daniel started gently. "Ms. Reynolds, can you tell the court why you're here today?" I looked straight at the judge, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'm here because someone forged my signature to try and take my house. That house is all I have. It's where I raised my son. I didn't sign those papers. And I want my home back." Daniel guided me through the evidence piece by piece. The forged document, the security footage, the bank statements showing my son's debt, the text messages from his wife. Each time something new was displayed, I could feel the room shifting, the clerk glancing up, the bailiff raising an eyebrow, even the judge's mouth tightening. Finally, Daniel asked the question I had been dreading. "Ms. Reynolds, do you know who submitted this fraudulent transfer request?" My throat tightened. I turned my head slowly toward my son. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Yes," I said quietly. "It was my son." The room was silent for a beat that felt like forever. Even his wife shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Then it was their turn. My son's lawyer, a man in an expensive gray suit, stood and approached me. "Mrs. Reynolds," he began smoothly. "You love your son, don't you?" "Yes," I said immediately. "More than anything. And isn't it true that you had considered signing the house over to him at one point?" "Yes," I admitted. "I had considered it. But I said no. That was my decision to make." "Maybe you just forgot signing the papers," he pressed. "You are in your late 60s, correct?" My chest tightened. There it was, the implication that I was just a forgetful old woman. But instead of breaking me, it lit a fire. "No," I said firmly, my voice ringing louder than I expected. "I did not forget. I did not sign. Being 68 years old does not mean I can't remember what I did yesterday." When it was my son's turn to testify, I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. He walked to the stand slowly, his shoulders hunched, and for a brief second, he looked like the boy I used to know, the boy who used to run through sprinklers in our front yard. But then he swore in, sat down, and started talking. He admitted to filing the paperwork. He admitted to using my signature. But he tried to justify it. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his voice cracking. I was drowning. We were going to lose everything. I thought if we could get the house, sell it, pay off the debt, we'd all be okay." I felt tears sting my eyes, not from pity, but from the pain of hearing him say it out loud. "So you thought the solution," Daniel asked sharply, "was to take your mother's home without her consent?" He hesitated. "Yes, that was it." The judge called for a recess, then returned with her ruling. "This court finds that the transfer was fraudulent," she said firmly. "Ownership of the property remains with Ms. Reynolds. Furthermore, given the severity of the forgery and the involvement of additional parties, this case will be referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." Her gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the room. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It was over, at least legally. But as I walked out of the courtroom past my son, who wouldn't even look at me, I realized something. The law might have given me my house back, but nothing could give me back my son. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun was blinding. It should have felt like freedom, like triumph. I had fought for my home and won. But all I felt was hollow. Daniel said something encouraging about the next steps and the district attorney's investigation, but his voice sounded far away, like I was underwater. I just nodded, thanked him, and walked to my car. My car. The one my son had stolen only a week ago. Now it sat in the parking lot like nothing had happened, keys back in my hand. It felt symbolic, somehow, everything was back where it belonged. Except us. That night, the house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not tense. Not frightening. Just empty. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the framed photos on the wall, the kitchen counter where my son used to sit and tell me about his day. It all felt like a museum now, a place full of memories that no one would ever come back to visit. The next day I got a call. It was my son. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me needed to hear his voice. When I picked up, there was a long pause. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was raw, quiet. I waited, my heart thudding in my chest. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry." For a moment, my throat tightened and I almost forgave him right then and there. But then I remembered the text messages. The forged papers. The nights of fear. "I can't talk about this right now," I said softly. "I need time." There was another long pause. "Okay," he said. And then the line went dead. In the weeks that followed, word spread around town. Neighbors started showing up at my door, some with casseroles, some with just quiet hugs. They all said the same thing. "You did the right thing." But doing the right thing didn't stop it from hurting. One afternoon, I drove by my son's house. His car was in the driveway, but I didn't stop. Through the window, I saw his wife sitting on the couch, arms crossed, staring at the floor while he paced the room. They looked like strangers to me. And maybe that's what they had become. I spent hours in the garden after that, digging, planting, pulling weeds until my back ached. It was the only thing that felt grounding, the only thing that reminded me I was still here, still standing. As I worked, I thought about what Martha had said. People do desperate things when they're scared. Maybe that was true. Maybe my son had been desperate. But desperation doesn't excuse betrayal. And forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. A month later, I got a letter from the district attorney's office. They were moving forward with charges against the notary, and investigating whether my son could be held criminally liable. I held the letter in my hands for a long time. I didn't know if I wanted him to go to jail. I just wanted him to understand what he had done. I wanted him to realize that love is not a license to take. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of a train. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. I had stood up for myself. I had protected my home. And even though my heart still ached, I knew I had done what I had to do. But I also knew one thing for certain. The next move was his. If my son wanted to rebuild what he had broken, the door would always be open, but this time he'd have to walk through it with clean hands. The following Monday, the entire family gathered at the courthouse for the formal hearing. Daniel sat next to Melissa, their faces pale. They weren't smiling this time. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the arrogance. They looked small, like children who had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a sharp gaze, read over the file for a few minutes before speaking. "Mrs. Rivera," she said, looking at me, "your evidence is solid. The deed is in your name, and the unauthorized attempt to transfer the property has been blocked. Your son and daughter-in-law are barred from making any further financial decisions on your behalf without court approval." I felt the weight lift from my chest. My house was safe. My life was safe. But then the judge turned to Daniel. "Young man," she said sternly, "you should be ashamed. This woman raised you, sacrificed for you, and you repay her by trying to take away the roof over her head. I'm not sentencing you to jail because your mother has asked for mercy, but I am ordering 200 hours of community service. You will spend it helping the elderly in this community, the very people you tried to take advantage of." Daniel's head dropped. Melissa gripped his hand but didn't dare say a word. When it was all over, I walked out of the courthouse with Maria. The sunlight felt different. Brighter, warmer, freer. "Mom," Maria said softly, "are you okay?" I nodded, tears filling my eyes. "Yes. For the first time in a long time, I feel at peace." A few weeks later, Daniel came by the house. He didn't knock like before. He stood at the edge of the porch, almost too ashamed to look at me. "Mom," he said, his voice low, Sorry. I don't know what came over me. I let money and Melissa's pressure twist me into someone I don't even recognize. I miss being your son." I studied him for a long moment. This was the boy I had raised. Not the man who had stormed into my house and taken my keys, but the scared little boy who used to hide behind my skirt when he was in trouble. "Daniel," I said finally, "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You will have to earn my trust again, day by day." His eyes watered. He nodded. "I will. I promise." Melissa never came back. Daniel told me later they had separated. Apparently, when the money disappeared, so did her love. Months later, I sat on my porch with Maria, drinking coffee as the sun rose. The house was quiet, peaceful, full of life again. "I still can't believe everything that happened," Maria said. I smiled faintly. Sometimes the storm comes to show you who's willing to stand with you in the rain. And sometimes it comes to wash away what no longer belongs in your life. I looked out at my garden, thriving, blooming just like me. Had my house. Had my peace. And most importantly, I had myself. Thank you for being here. These stories remind us that none of us are alone. Drop a red heart if you believe justice was served.